The one thing I know about the podcast game is always give the listeners what they want. So on this episode, we're going to discuss whether Bukayo Saka is England's best goalkeeper. This is the Arsenal Vision Post-Match Podcast. My name is Elliot Smith, the Black Man Twitter Gunner. Yeah, that's right. We're going to discuss all the possible positions Bukayo Saka might be good at and should be played at for England, other than the one where he might be the best player in the world. But, why not just play him in the other positions? Why let him do it on easy mode? Why let anyone do anything on easy mode? Do everything on hard mode. And England seem to be doing things on hard mode, including England fans and Arsenal fans and club fans who are all at war with one another, which is just a day that ends in Y. So we're going to get into that. But what we're really going to do is we're going to waffle for 25 minutes to fill time before a really, really great interview with Kieran Maguire, finance professor and author of The Price of Football, an expert in the framework, financial frameworks around the game. And he is going to talk to us about the latest transfer moves and what they tell us about PSR and navigating PSR and potentially circumventing PSR, a little bit on Manchester City, of course, and the future of the game based on the financial rules and the gamesmanship happening to try to circumvent those rules. I believe as of recording, we are sold out for our LA event. So I want to thank everyone who got tickets, but I'm going to leave the link in the description if you want to click it and see. I know sometimes when you get to when there's like a ticket left or not a ticket left, someone cancels and there might be a ticket. So I'm leaving the link in there. But again, it is the Thursday before the game. It's a shared reality video at the Cosm Center, followed by a live pod, followed by an Arsenal party with legends and all kinds of fun stuff. So we'd love to see you there. More importantly, no, not more importantly, but importantly, over on Patreon, we did a scouting video. I think we did a fantastic scouting video, if I do say so myself, of Eberechi Eze and Nico Williams. I have to admit, one, I was very taken with, and another, less taken with than I expected, but both very interesting players to run the rule over, and I think moves that can be debated. We did a little debate there, too, about how to do scouting and on about the dynamics for Arsenal's left eight versus left winger and what we want there. So check it out. I hope you like it. Tim also did another history pod on Arsenal's move to Highbury. And that is in a collection that we have on Patreon called History. So you can just go for walks and take in the history of the club. So a lot of really cool stuff that we're doing over there. And we'd just love to have you be a part of that, community. But just glad you're part of this community and here listening to this pod. A lot of stuff with Tim and Paul and myself this week as Clive takes a well-deserved, much-needed vacation, holiday, as you might say. What I will tell you is that we all went to New York a little while back, and Clive had a margarita, and he was just in heaven, and we were like, oh, you like margaritas? He's like, this is the first margarita I've ever had. We're like, it's the what? And so where he is currently, I hope he is indulging in more margaritas. I am sure it is a specialty there. So just a little insight into Clive, who is always discovering new things to love in the world. He is so engulfed in football, he didn't have time to discover margaritas, but we fixed that for him. Here with me now is Paul. You can find him on Twitter, Pause My Pants. Pause.
Woohoo!
Woohoo indeed. How you doing, bud?
Good. Very good. Very good. End of the second quarter for me, Elliot. How about yourself?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how to break this to you. You're supposed to be a football expert. They don't play quarters. They play halves. So I assume you're watching the Copa America game. Oh, no, you were talking business. No, I don't do business. And apparently my numbers reflect the same story. So, Paul, let's get into the international football. And just before we get into the dire stuff, because I have to admit the England discourse has been pretty disheartening, and I'm not really enjoying it, but I've been enjoying the tournament. So are you loving the tournament? Are you soaking it up? Or are you keeping some distance from football to try to refresh your brain? Where are you at with the Euros?
I pace myself. I ramp myself up as the tournament goes along. There have been a few crackers. I particularly enjoyed that Italy game. In a weird way, I'm Irish, right? As some of you may have noticed. So the England relationship is always an interesting one for me. I ramp down with England as the tournament goes on. So I start off kind of hoping they do quite well because I know a few of the players, and obviously I know a couple of the players very, very well this tournament. So I'm kind of pulling for them to kind of at least be decent. I don't know how I'll feel about them if they ever got to the semi-finals or the finals, and in most cases neither do they know how they would feel about it. But my emotions start to kind of move around. I start becoming a bit more Irish the more the English media becomes a bit more English and like giving it large, and like, they can get pretty cocky, which is not the English supporters' fault, certainly not the Arsenal English supporters' fault, but it does tend to put me off as the tournament goes along. But we've had we've had some quite vibrant hand-wringing so far with the English media, with the fans, with the reactions. It's a little early for me. I was expecting to still be getting some positive vibes from the England team before things turned on them. Yeah, it's complicated. It's probably complicated for other countries too. I mean, Belgium were getting a rough time from their fans. It's like fans hate losing. Not that England has lost, but they have the sense that they're not going anywhere in the tournament. The fans do, and they hate poor performances, but they'll let that go if you keep winning.
Yeah, and I think everything, we say it so much, but the way you feel is measured in the distance between your expectation and your reality, right? So right now you look at teams like Georgia, Slovenia, Slovakia, Turkey, right? Austria, they're in seventh heaven. In Austria, to be fair, they just look like a really good team. And by the way, maybe a point we want to come on to, a really well-coached team, which is rare in the international game, but they are doing really well. Rangnick has them playing, I think, better than the sum of their parts. And we're seeing from some of the bigger teams like Belgium for sure, but France and England as well. While the results are sufficient, the performances are not. And the distance between, I think, the expectation of performance and outcome is why there's a lot of unhappiness. Now, in England's case, Paul, he's only gone and done it again. Gareth Southgate is a master of something. And if you want to find the best possible international manager, you want an international manager who can master what Gareth Southgate has mastered, which is finding yourself on the right side of the draw for the knockout rounds, because he's only gone and done it again. Have you had a chance to look at the brackets yet? Or would you like me to just give you a little primer on this? Because it's pretty exciting for England fans.
Well, run the listeners through it.
And I do have to say, look, can I just be honest? I have an affection for England. I love an English football club. I spend time in England. I've done some work there. I have friends who I adore in England. I have an affection for England. And now that we have Arsenal players that I care about that are in the England setup, I'm even more committed to this England team. You are right. They really, really drag the joy out of it, don't they? They're just a way to sap that joy out of it. But England have avoided Spain, Germany, Portugal, France, and Belgium. They will face one of, if they beat Slovakia, they get the winner of Italy, Switzerland. If they beat that, win that game, their quarterfinal will be against, their semifinal will be against one of Romania, the Netherlands, Austria, or Turkey. So, I mean, Southgate has this talent. And to be fair, they topped the group. That's all they're meant to do. In topping the group, they put themselves into a draw that they will be absolutely favorites in every game they play right up until the final. And it's a chance for them to get right. And so maybe all the hand-wringing will come to nothing. But unfortunately, Paul, there is hand-wringing. And I just think one of the things that's changed so much is club football has gotten more intense and more intense and more intense. And social media has created tribalism that has gotten more intense and more intense. And there's a very online specific type of tribalism. And people retreat into corners of fandom. They become stans. And a lot of what's happening in football social media now reminds me of what happened with K-pop stans, years back, where they just flood mentions. They'd go after anybody that disagrees. Sometimes see this with Swifties. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a Swiftie myself, so I would never besmirch the name of a Swiftie. But you'd see this kind of mob behavior, standing behavior. And it's behavior that seems to want to root out any viewpoint or opinion that is anything other than undying affection and appreciation expressed for a player that they stand. And it's a shame, but it is the reality of the online existence. And I want to be careful not to give that so much credence that we focus our conversation around it. But the reason I bring this up is that there has been Bukayo Saka played fine, I thought, in the latest game. And I do think he suffered from having Kyle Walker on the right, who wasn't giving him any service. Harry Kane, who's just really playing for himself. He wants to drop in. He doesn't want to push the defense back. He doesn't have anyone really pulling defenders away and overlapping. So they're doubling up on him, facing a lot of the stuff he sees against Arsenal, but with no Martin Odegaard to come in and help him. Gallagher was the guy standing in the Odegaard role. Need I say more? But so he comes off, Cole Palmer comes on, immediately everything shifts over to the left. You get Trent Alexander-Arnold at fullback. All of a sudden, Palmer's standing in acres of space. You have players that want to run in behind a little more, and he had a little bit of joy. And look, I'm not such an Arsenal person that I can't say I thought Kyle Palmer looked Cole Palmer looked good in his cameo. He did. And Cole Palmer is a good player. For me, this boils down to this. I have no ambiguity about how good Bukayo Saka is. I've watched him play 50 plus games for Arsenal the last few seasons as our best or one of our best players and one of the best players in the league. I have no ambiguity at all. How animated are you about the debate around Saka and this seeming need to elevate Palmer over Saka or Foden over them, or it's someone's fault and it's got to be Saka's? Because it feels so tedious. And you see a lot of big countries that have to make a decision to leave a good player, a really good player on the bench or not. It just goes with the territory. And I don't know why we can't just accept that our player is good, whatever that happens in the international game.
Yeah. How animated? Not very. That's other people's. This is the beauty of it not being my country, but a kind of, like you, having a kind of lukewarm affection for not the country, the actual country, yes, but not the national team, but like the kind of the melange of players in there for the most part. Like, I can let it go as soon as it becomes a bit toxic. I'm not ready to do that yet. I'm still hoping for some, a bit of a run here from the boys. And I have a very liberal view of what the boys are. It's beyond our couple of lads. But, I think what we're really doing wrong here, Elliot, is we have once again ignored the format. And the format is stock rising Ben White. Stock rising Martin Odegaard, stock rising Kai Havertz. Like, start putting those guys around Saka, and it starts making all kinds of sense. He's a pattern, structure, control possession in the attacking third. All those things that England seems to do for about 5 minutes a game in a good game, and then they retreat back into their shells. I get all the pushes for Cole Palmer and why people want him over Saka. I get it. But that's saying, well, we give up on England actually playing good football. If England are planning to not play good football, then that's probably right. Do scrap Bukayo Saka, or at least start thinking about other ways of using him, and take your broken team and use Cole Palmer as a direct attacking. He's a guy we'd have on our left wing. He'd be doing the Martinelli role. He'd be going at them because we have Saka and the boys doing patterns over on the right-hand side. Your Bens, your Martin Odegaards, your Kai Havertz drifting into that space, kind of structure, tempo, control, recycling, and then switch it to the other wing with a much more direct option from there. But if that's what you're going to put in front of instead of Saka, then, geez, he's got a lot of homework to do in the evenings to make something interesting in terms of football. He might get you a goal, but he's not going to get. That isn't the answer. Playing that way isn't the way for England to start playing good football. The draw, though, like it may have no impact on them, but they may look at that draw and say, "Holy shit, we've been crap. We've dodged a huge bullet." And it might just bring them into life when they see that draw to say, you know what, let's really fucking go for it. Let's really, a level of confidence due to what is opened before them rather than what they have achieved so far. It's like they got themselves a few more lives of the cat, and they go for it. But they've got such a long way to actually start playing good football, and they may well have Italy in the next round or Switzerland, both of whom are highly competent, if they get that far, by the way.
I think it does show you, too, that like the international game is tough because unlike Ragnick, who seems to have no problem implementing a really sophisticated and effective tactical approach, a lot of these big nations just try to put the names out there and hope that will solve problems. But in order to solve problems, you have to have the right profiles. I should point out that Cole Palmer did start with Foden, with Kane, with Mainu and Rice, with Walker, in the tune-up against Iceland right before the tournament that England lost 1-0 at home in insipid fashion. So, the idea that there's a magic bullet, and I think you see this in every sport, right? When it's not going well, the players who aren't playing are the obvious heroes and the obvious answers. I do think that when you look at a Switzerland who has a Granit Xhaka in midfield, right? And you look at Spain with the controlling players they have in midfield, I just think it is the case that Declan Rice needs needs someone with him because Jude Bellingham's not that guy, or at least not the way he's deployed. He's almost playing like sport striker. He wants to go wherever he wants to go. There's got to be a guy who puts his foot on the ball and is primarily tasked with distributing a high volume of passes and high percentage and punching the ball between the lines. The thing that's hard for me is I've seen Southgate make changes like bringing Gallagher in, and then I look at how he's playing, and he's all the way up in the attacking third. He's advanced. I don't know what he's going to do there. I don't know how he's going to influence there. Scott's pass network for this last game was really interesting, by the way, because the dot for Trippier and the dot for Foden and the dot for Jude Bellingham were basically on top of each other, which I think is actually an elegant summary of the problem. And so this is the thing as a nation. Do I think you should drop Jude Bellingham, who's one of the best players in the world? Probably not. Do I think you should drop Harry Kane, who is the best player in the Bundesliga this season? Probably not. Do you think you should drop Bukayo Saka, who I think is the best right wing maybe in our league and in the world? It was certainly one of them, right? He's right there in that category. Should you drop Phil Foden, who was the player of the season in the Premier League? You can name all these players and in isolation say, no, you shouldn't. But you're going to have to. You're going to have to find an alchemy that works. And if it winds up being Saka who's sacrificed, this is where I can wear my Arsenal hat and say, oh no, our best player will get the rest he desperately needs, because I don't need the England validation to know how good he is. I do understand that there are some fans who live in England who are Arsenal fans who are like, this guy's been scapegoated in the past. He's been given a hard time. He's not appreciated as he should be. And they want him to be defended. But ultimately, what I want is for him to come play great football for Arsenal. So I can distance myself from this a little. What do you think of?
Could I also add on that? He's a big boy now. He's not 19 or 20. He can handle it. If it's a setback because tactically they switch to a different direction, or if it's kind of the fact that all these players are getting slagged off in the media and blah, like if he's going to become the player that we know he will become, this stuff, it won't be water off a duck's back. It will impact these players a little bit, but it's not going to be like the treatment he got when he was a kid, and the way the media handled him for missing the penalty and it's just not going. Like if a similar situation arrives, but for what's going on at the moment, I don't wish it upon him, but he's a tough character, I think. He looks like a choir boy, but you don't
have to be tough to get kicked the way he does and get up and not, not throw a strop. And I agree with you. I think he has a character of steel. Absolutely.
He's tough. So we shouldn't be over. You'll remember me in the early days of him getting kicked and me saying, I'm not that worried about it. I think he's going to be fine. So I just get the sense from him. He knows it. I've called him as well a kind of what's my phrase? He's kind of a kid who's an old man in many ways. I see in Smith Rowe a little bit of the kid, but Bukayo Saka is an old man in terms of his maturity and his balance and his steadiness, and not too much phases him. I'm sure he's got plenty of emotions like any. What is he now? 27. They grow up on you so quick.
He isn't. No, he's 20. He's 23.
23. I'm sure he's got plenty of emotions for a 23-year-old, but he knows how to bring them into check. He's going to be fine.
I have to correct myself, by the way. The reason I said he's 23, he's going into his age 23 season. He'll be 23 this season, but he is still technically 22. And as you know, you are 22 until you're 23. That's how it
23.
Works.
That's how it works.
Yeah. So, well, on a few things here. I mean, because I look at other nations that are having this issue. Like there's every possibility Germany might decide to go with Füllkrug over Kai Havertz. Am I going to judge who Kai Havertz is on 3 games he played this summer? Or am I going to judge him on the 50 games he played for us? Right? Leo Trossard, by the way, you want to talk about an Arsenal player not impressing. He has not impressed for Belgium. And I think today, as we record this, we're recording on a Wednesday, he just had, I think, his worst performance for Belgium. He was hooked at I want to say 57 minutes or something, or something early, and he was not good playing from the right, admittedly, where I don't think he's as strong. But I know who these players are. And I do think when you've played 50 games for your club and your season has gone right down to the very bitter end, the last day of the season, and you're shagged out, now you have to go play an international tournament. Some players might be a little fresher. Some players are a little less fresh. Some players have more minutes in their legs or need the break. We know Bukayo, wasn't fit going into this tournament. He didn't play for us against Everton in a game that, we did have to win, by the way. So, he's playing through something like he always is. I think my sort of broader view is just, it's okay with me if someone wants to rate a player differently. I think tribalism plays a role, but Bukayo Saka is beyond question for me at this point. There's no doubting Saka and who he is and how good he is. In his age cohort, he really is peerless in terms of what he's doing at club level. So I don't have a concern.
The clearest example is Saliba, right? Okay, he's starting now, but there was every chance he'd be sitting on the bench for these 3 games, or so we thought coming into this tournament. Still wouldn't make him anything other than the best centre-back or one of 2 in the league, regardless, to your point, right? It's unquestioned. And yet he might not be playing a single minute. Turns out he's playing lots of minutes.
Yeah.
It turns out and he's playing left centre back, which is good experience for us. You never know when we might need that. I don't think it necessarily is his best look. I think he gets himself into some. He's such a risk non-averse. What's the opposite to risk averse? Risk.
Inviting, risk taking,
risk leaning, risk invite. I'm going to go with inviting. I like inviting.
Risk oriented, risk inclined.
Risk inclined, okay. Mm-hmm. Risk inclined player that playing from he should probably be more conservative as an LCB, but he's still spinning around, beating the press, dodging 2 players, nutmegging a couple of guys. So he's still going for it. He'd probably be a little better off being more conservative, but that's his MO. So hey, go for it. But he's the classic. If he didn't play, he'd still be top level. And I think it applies to all the players you mentioned there. We know who these guys are. Managers of international teams it's a weird thing. It's like a scramble for a race where you jump into your car and you're like, that's the preparations for these things. It's very hard for them to come up with a good system, especially if you're not a very good manager. Cough, cough. It's so hard to come up with a good system the players bed into. And these players are all puzzle pieces. The tournament's still going on and you're still trying to get the pieces to work together and fit together. Saka's obviously the answer if you want good play, but he may just have to be more pragmatic and have guys who can more directly go straight at goal, which Cole Palmer certainly is.
Yeah, and I mean, all you have to do is look at the fact that Leroy Sané doesn't start for Germany. Do you think Bayern have any doubts about him? Look at France. Camavinga doesn't start for France. There's an argument he's one of the best midfielders in the world, full stop. Do you think Real Madrid fans have any doubt about Camavinga? And you can go through all the teams and find examples like this of players who, for one reason or another, are not selected or appreciated at international level in the way they are at club level.
I got it, Elliot. Mm-hmm. It's like you get your 2 favorite jigsaws together, right? Mm-hmm. All the pieces, and you mix them all together and you start because they're your favorite. And like, what would be better than having your 2 favorite jigsaws, right? Them all together in one jigsaw.
Yeah.
But then you find that even though you got a couple of your favorite pieces from your favorite jigsaw, they don't fit together because like they're different jigsaws.
Yeah. I mean, that's the analogy I was looking for. Look, it's a long way of essentially saying that I think we find ourselves in this interesting position where Arsenal fans feel, and I understand why, the need to defend Saka against criticism being levied at him for the England performance. And what I think people misunderstand is I don't think Saka's had the criticism levied at him so much as there's a player that plays at a big club that's the hot new young thing that in people's minds, he'll fix everything, right? I see people saying Wharton should start. Adam Wharton, I think that's his name, right? Why? Because people are close watchers of Crystal Palace and know how good he is? No. because they know midfield's a problem and he's young and exciting and he'll fix it, right? I think there's a similarity with Cole Palmer, which is, hey, we're not playing great, and a player we know who had a really good season at a really big club is sitting on the bench. Let's play him. And it just so happens that guy plays Bukayo Saka's position. And I don't think it has anything to do with Saka, frankly. If Cole Palmer was a left winger, I think people would be saying, you got to get Foden out of there, right? I think if he was a 10, people would be saying, you got to get Jude Bellingham out of there. And ultimately, I do think if you have a striker who had one of his best seasons ever in the Bundesliga, and you have a number 10 who just had one of the best seasons ever at 20 years old in La Liga and in the Champions League, and you have a right wide forward who's one of the best right wide forwards in world football, right? And you have a center midfielder in Declan Rice, who's arguably the second best center midfielder behind only Rodri, right? And you keep going through and you have all these guys, and they all look terrible, then I don't think the players are the problem. It's really that simple for me. And I do think if you go down this road of letting Bukayo Saka's Euros become existential for you, you're only going to make yourself miserable. I think it is as simple as we know who he is, just as we know who Kai is, just as we know who Declan is, just as we know who the smartest of them all, Ben White, is, because he's living his best life right now while these guys are having to deal with this. I wanted to bring up one other thing, though. So Ian Wright had actually suggested, I think, in a post-match discussion, just saying, well, what if we play Saka at left back? I think people really hated hearing that. So let me just say this first. I don't agree with the idea. I don't think it's the right thing to do. I saw a lot of vitriol towards Ian about this, but I think this goes to the whole point again of stan culture versus just being logical, which is England have a very big problem on the left-hand side. Because Southgate has not brought the left-hand side players he needs, he should have brought Rashford, I think. He should have brought someone who can play left fullback with a left foot, and he hasn't. And they need a player who has a left foot, who can play a wing-backy kind of role, who can overlap and stretch the pitch. Now, putting Saka there would be moving him out of the position where he's one of the best in the world into a position he hasn't played in a while. But I think it is a credit to Saka that anyone thinks he could just go do that. Because I think a lot of us say Saka could play 8, Saka could play 9, Saka could play. He's just that player, right? He is so good he could take up any position. So while I don't agree with the suggestion, it is that sort of fantasy football idea of, well, then I can have Saka and Palmer and Jude and Foden and Kane, right? Because there is that tendency to be like, how many of the players whose names I know who are really good can I put on the pitch? So I don't love the idea. I certainly understand why it was suggested, because a left-footed player who's got an attacking verb and can overlap on the left would be handy for England right now. Do you have any issue with that having been mooted as an idea? Like, I don't think it's a good idea, but I don't think it's like some blasphemy to suggest you try to put all the good players on, you know?
Well, like, I just think that boat has sailed at this point for Saka. When I've seen him, he does a job defending and he's energetic and he covers back. But when I've seen him actually, there's been 1 or 2 games you see across the season where there's a period where we say, okay, you're now a full back for 10 minutes. And like, he gets beat quite a bit, right? If you actually give him the full back job, because that hasn't been his gig for a while. Nor do I want to see him, like, a wing back was always, look, it ruined feckin' Reece James, right? Now, maybe he was always going to get ruined, but there's so much work to be done as a wing back. It's not something I want to see for Saka. I don't think Gareth Southgate should want to see that for England, trying to see, can you be the guy who finally broke Saka by asking him to do the position that has 2 jobs, here and up and back, and like the strain on you playing a different side of the pitch and having to play a much more defensive role. It's way like that. The boat sailed in so many different ways. If that's the throw of the die, had they come into the tournament and planned for it and had let Saka the legs for it, that's one thing. I think it would look like panic. Yeah, I think it would actually be panic.
It would be panic. It wouldn't look like panic. It would just be panic.
It's fair enough. If the Titanic,
not at the disco.
Titanic, If back to the Titanic, but I mean, there is a time for panic. Don't get me wrong. When the ship has hit the iceberg and is going down, go for it, panic. But like right now, what he needs on that pitch, and I think you were heading in that direction. He needs a guy who can pass and string it together. And there's lots of good players on there. It just felt like, I'm sure they had some reasonable passing sequences in the last game, but it felt like they couldn't string two passes together. They couldn't make the passes that they make day in, day out, game in, game out. It was a weird, clunky performance that told the opposition, "You have a great chance today," because we can't play football. We have in our past as Arsenal had games where we're like, that was a weird half, or that was a one-off weird game. We didn't seem to be able to make any passes, and I think it's part fatigue, part lack of belief, part not trusting others, yourself. But I'm not saying Jorginho is the answer. He probably wouldn't be. Plus, he's playing for one of the competitive teams in their half of the knockouts. But a guy who can string some passes together and get some rhythm, and it wasn't this game, and it wasn't even the England campaign so far. But I mean, I do think that can potentially be an issue for Arsenal at some stage, depending on who the players are around. I think you need quite a passy left eight. That's why I like the Gundogan idea for Arsenal, a left eight-ish kind of player, if Rice is going to be the six. Because I just think you need the guys who can knit it together. You might have a very clunky midfield on many a day because, Rice can pull off all sorts of passes. You think, oh, I didn't know he had that in his locker, and he can do it time and time again. But he's not a rhythm, tempo, feel the game, move it around, speed it up, slow it down. I think England's lacking that. I think it'll be very interesting to see what the plan is for midfield next year, because otherwise you'll be pulling Martin Odegaard back a bit, or if it's Kai Havertz playing left eight, maybe for many people that's gone in their thinking. But you could have a couple of players who are not technically the smoothest, aren't the rhythm passers, aren't in your three-man midfield.
Yeah, and look, ultimately, whatever you think of Saka's performances, and frankly, I think he's been fine. Like I really do. I think for an England team that is not firing and not working and doesn't have all the right pieces, he's doing fine. And I do think it's interesting, by the way, that the thought of moving Saka is reacted to so harshly. But like Trent Alexander-Arnold, who I think is, if not the best right back in the world, certainly in the conversation for it, started this tournament in midfield, which is a disrespect of its own, right? Which is like, hey, you make us too vulnerable playing in your natural position, so we're going to try to put you in an unnatural position. And the fact that England can't find a way to use, an England team that desperately needs an injection of attacking flair, can't find a way to use the most flary attacking fullback in football is a shame. But
it would seem to be a recognition by Southgate that his midfield lacks the passing, right? There are different kinds of passers, but the boy can pick a pass, right? He can knit things together. He can spot a guy in space and find him. The pace of pass, all the kind of speed it up, slow it down, all those kinds of things. The England midfield definitely looks like something that lacks that. They're being found out by lesser teams. I thought it was going to take better teams, but they're already been found. They're finding themselves out. They're just not finding a rhythm.
And there's so many ways you could solve it. Or you could go to a back three, and you could have a Stones, Walker, Gahey back three, and Stones could stride into midfield and join Rice and give him a little that passing partner in a role that would be comfortable for him, similar to what he does at City. And then you could have a Trent at right back because you have a little more security there. You could play maybe a wing back type left winger if you want to play Anthony Gordon there. Like, would it be the end of the world? Rice can cover a lot of ground and protect him, and you can be a little careful. But what does that mean? That means you have to take out one of the names, and I just don't think there's any way around it. It'll be interesting to see how he solves it. I'm not going to pretend I have the solution, but I do think in general, my take on the Euros has been, I love to see Arsenal players thrive anywhere they go, and I root for them, and I get excited to see them thrive wherever they go. But I think I've outgrown the idea that a few games in the summer is going to tell me something about a player that I didn't know from 50 games during the club season, when they're in their natural habitat, in the environment they're used to, when they're not completely shagged out and overplayed. So I'm inclined to let this go. And I just think Saka's beyond question for me. We love him. We know who he is. We know what he is. The fact that England's a little bit broken and doesn't have a solution, and that's dragging down a lot of talented players, I don't think we need to let that influence our idea of Saka. And unfortunately, because we are all online at some level, right? We just all check in on social media and things like that. Increasingly, you're going to encounter Chelsea trolls and, City trolls, and everybody wants to get one up on their rival club. And especially now that we're relevant, it's interesting. When Saka broke through and he was a likable kid for an Arsenal that was irrelevant, it was very different from a Saka who was the star trying to take the throne of someone like Mohamed Salah, who's keeping down the young upstarts from other big clubs for an Arsenal that is right there with City, right? While Chelsea are going through a hard time and United are going through a hard time, long may it continue. So it is a different dynamic. Just as
it's
a final,
good though. It's toughening. It's these guys need. He's going to need this. If we're half the club, we become half the club we want to become. He's going to be getting shit and pelters, and like the better he becomes, the more of a kind of iconic player in the game. It's a toughening process. He's going to be fine. He's going to learn lessons from this process. We as supporters, I think the England supporters out there, our brethren in arms, you and I are freed from this. Neither of us have a team in this particular competition, the Euros. So we are free to enjoy the football. So I would say to my English brethren, let go of your team. Let it go. Enjoy the competition where it takes you. Don't get too attached to that English team. It may blow up in your face.
Yeah, I mean, it seems so weird that we're doing the Gerrard and Lampard can't play together thing all over again. But it does seem the case for me that when I look around world football, I'm minded. There was in American politics, there was a famous quote: "It's the economy, stupid." I'm starting to think it's the midfield, stupid. Is like the thing that I'm just so laser focused on, because you see the teams that have that mix right, and the way they fire and the way they work and the way they collectively are able to build play and control the areas of the pitch they want to control and get the balance between security and attack. And the teams that can't get the midfield right are the teams that really seem to struggle with that. So it'd be interesting to see if England solve it. I guess I would say Bukayo Saka is just as likely to be the star hero for England as anything else. I still think that is very much in the frame. It's also worth noting, before people worry that he's not properly rated or loved, I think he's consecutive year England Player of the Year player as voted by fans. I think he was voted the England Player of the Year consecutively for his national team by fans. Yeah. He's started almost every game for Southgate. So if this is a little blip, and I don't think it is in terms of his performances, I think you're right, Paul. I think he will ride over that blip with ease. It'll be nothing but a speed bump for him. So last
and
thought here.
Will these players feel loved when they get back to our club? I mean, okay, there are times the relationship between a player and our club can get a little dicey, but we're pretty good. I think we were excellent with Kai Havertz on the average over last season. And every one of these players will feel the difference between the shit they got at the Euros. They go back to Arsenal. I always love that line about they were complaining about Ben White saying he was going to go home from the England camp, and he didn't go home. He went to Arsenal in Dubai or wherever we were. And that's just a different definition of home. I bet it felt like home to him, right? He's back among those people who believe in him and who support him. That, for a footballer, that was another version of home. And these guys are supported and genuinely and generally feel the love. So
yeah, that dressing room is their home, the Arsenal dressing room. And in a way, I mean, if you remember, when Bukayo missed the penalty and the abuse he took, coming home to Arsenal was what lifted him up. And he was, wrapped around the flag of our club and embraced and beloved by our supporters. And maybe there is something to be said for the fact that coming home to Arsenal will feel so good for these players who were reminded once again that that's the place where they can really just be appreciated for who they are. So we'll see what happens. I mean, I'm still going to root for England, of course. I'm enjoying the tournament tremendously. I do have to admit, I think, and this, look, I love Schadenfreude. I love tribalism in football. I think it makes a lot of fun. I think some of the stand culture around players is a little tedious. You'd see it on the interwebs sometimes where anytime Ronaldo was mentioned, the Messi stands and the replies would be like Pinaldo. And anytime Messi was mentioned, the Ronaldo stands Pessi, and I think you just have to shrug that stuff off and not let it get to you. So Well, Paul, we're going to shift gears and talk football finance and PSR and some of the moves that Everton and Chelsea and Villa have been making, and what it means.
I hadn't prepped for any of this, Elliot.
Well, luckily for you, Kieran Maguire is going to do all the talking, and you are going to do the goodbying. And I've asked hopefully some intelligent questions, and he's given all the intelligent information. So he's done the heavy lifting for us. I think we can leave it there. Go check out the scouting video for Nico Williams and Eze and Tim's History Pod on Patreon if you want. We're going to shift gears now and talk to Kieran. But first, before I do that, I want to tell you that we have an offer for you on NordVPN. Look, right now, this time of year, I am trying to watch football all the time in a lot of different places. And if I'm moving around, if you're moving around, you know that sometimes getting access to the stream you want to watch is hard. If you want to be able to watch NBC when you're over in England, if you want to be able to watch BBC when you're in the US or around the world, if you want to sign up for certain streaming services, when you're in other nations and things like that, you can do that using NordVPN. It is an app. I have to give Clive kudos. He used our promo code and got the app just before his trip to the holiday he's on right now so that he could watch the Euros undisturbed. It is so easy. You put it on whatever device you use, you click a button, you tell it where you want to browse from, and all of a sudden all your apps and websites work like you're in that area. They also have threat protection so they can keep the viruses and spyware off your computer if you're going to one of those dodgy streams that I know some people do use, but of course I have never used one of those. We got a great offer that they gave us here, which is you get the NordVPN plan and 4 months for free, completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. So you're going to want to go to our promo code, which is nordvpn.com/ArsenalVision, nordvpn.com/ArsenalVision. Try it now. Go ahead and check that out. Plus, this podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp isn't just online therapy. It's just therapy. Really simple. I bring up my mom a lot with this because for her, I just saw someone who was so helped by therapy as a process. And when she moved to Minnesota from Florida, she left her therapist behind. She can't drive anymore. Very healthy, thankfully, but not a driver. And to rely on someone to get her to therapy would be difficult, especially in a new place. Able to use this service because it allows you to access therapy without having to get in the car, drive somewhere, match with someone, hope they're the right person. If not, find another office. It's a way to talk about the things that are on your mind that can hold you back, that can be weighing you down. I'll find sometimes I'm stressed and I just can't figure out why. And then sometimes just talking through it, I arrive at what's stressing me out that helps alleviate it and get back to my happy place. So get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/vision today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/vision. Do it now. Paul, is that enough of that? Is that enough of that? Paul.
Bloody hell, indeed.
Nailed it.
Indeed.
All right, Paul's on Twitter.
No, Elliot, indeed it is.
Oh, good. Perfect. Thanks for not stepping on Clive's line. Paul's on Twitter, Pause My Pants. Thanks, Pause. Woo! My name's Elliot Smith. I will now give way to me and Kieran Maguire. Okay, so without further ado, although there was much ado prior to this, I am joined now, pleased to be joined now by Kieran Maguire. You can find him on Twitter at Kieran Maguire. You can read his wonderful book, The Price of Football. Any popular bookseller will certainly have it, and you will learn a lot about the price of football and the finances in the game. And it is a pleasure to speak to an actual expert about a topic that everybody's talking about, but very few people know anything about. So here with me now, as I mentioned, is Kieran Maguire. Hi, Kieran.
Hi. Thanks very much for the invite. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I have to say, right, we try to cover a lot of topics on the pod in depth, and I think with a certain degree of intelligence. And there are some things that we know about, and then there are other things that we speak about but probably don't know enough to be expressing the views that we do. So my hope is that we can do two things here. Make it entertaining and enjoyable so people really, get the gist of what's happening in the transfer market, which everybody wants to know about, but also get some kind of foundational understanding for why these deals take place and what the rules are saying so that as we go on into seasons that are to come, we have an ability to better analyze the headlines that we're seeing and maybe not react to them emotionally, but react to them with a bit of education. So I'm excited to do that. So I think the first thing that everybody's going to want to know, I think, right now, because it's in the news, these strange moves between Chelsea and Villa and Juve, Everton, there's a perception that they're being done to bypass PSR. Can you sort of explain what the framework, what the PSR regulations require that they might be trying to comply with through these moves, and whether these moves actually comply with the rules as they currently exist?
Okay, the PSR rules allow a club in the Premier League to lose a maximum of 105 million sterling over a rolling 3-year period. Now, that 105 million sterling isn't the same number as you will see in the accounts. And the reason for that is that any money you spend on infrastructure, any money you spend on academy player development, any money you spend in terms of losses for the women's team, and any money you spend on your community schemes is excluded. So you get add backs. And therefore, if we take, I think is there another club in North London that people have heard of, perhaps?
No, I don't think so. There's a giant toilet bowl where I believe football has been played, but as far as a football club being there, I'm not familiar with it.
Okay, I mean, I wouldn't know anything about it.
Pardon my ignorance.
It's I look at clubs and they win trophies, and Arsenal seems to be the only club in the north of London that wins trophies.
You've just become a very popular guest on this podcast, by the way, so thanks for playing to the crowd.
But that club has around about a 70 million annual infrastructure cost going through their account. So whilst it will make significant accounting losses, actually it's in a very strong position from a PSR perspective. What the clubs will have done is for the 3 years to the 30th of June 2024, they will have a rough idea as to how close they are to that limit, or in the case of a few of them, they might be saying, unless we do something between now and the 30th of June, we're going to breach the limit. And we've seen over the course of the last few months, both Nottingham Forest Football Club and Everton Football Club have been charged, have been found effectively guilty by the commissions, and they have suffered on-field punishments in the form of points deductions. And nobody wants a point deduction. It increases the chances of relegation. It makes it more difficult to get the Champions League. It could cost you winning the Premier League. Nobody wants a point deduction. So what we are seeing clubs do is effectively scratch their chins and go, well, we need to get some money in quickly. We need to get some profits in quickly. What are the alternatives? They can't put season ticket money in because the next season doesn't start until August, and the financial year end for the vast majority of the football clubs is the 30th of June. So we've got a week in which to come up with something. You can effectively sell two things quickly to address this issue. One of which is to sell real estate, and some clubs in the Premier League, again, one club quite prominent in London,
sold themselves a hotel, sold
themselves a car park, and may have done the same in this year. They certainly did it in 2023. They will have potentially had to go and pay extra money out this year because, once again, they've sacked their coach. And in order to cover those costs, they've got to sell something. So I think they may have sold some real estate. But if you've got no real estate to sell, either because you're renting it or it's already mortgaged, so therefore your mortgage holder won't release you from it, what's the other option? The other option is to sell commodities in the shape of young men, and that's what we are doing. Yeah, and I know certainly when I visit the States and I talk about the transfer market, some of you guys say, "Well, hold on, yeah, that's pretty close to slavery." You are physically selling young men's talent, and that is deemed to be acceptable. So let's take a look at the current position. There are estimated to be 4, 5, 6 clubs potentially in the Premier League, each of whom are in danger, if the rumours are correct. And we're getting a lot of these stories from Twitter, and Twitter, not necessarily the most accurate place in the world.
First I'm hearing of that.
It's outrageous slur on Elon Musk there, I just say. And what the clubs are doing is saying, right, how can I deal with this? Now, how do you make a profit from selling a footballer? The profit is calculated as the transfer fee on the player sold less the book value of the player being sold. Now, that book value is the original cost less something called amortization. So if we take, I'll give you some crude figures. Let's take the case of Romelu Lukaku at Chelsea. Mm-hmm. They bought him 3 seasons ago, and we'll say it's for 100 million. They signed him on a 5-year contract. So what, therefore, they're going to say is, well, we take 100 million, divide that by 5, and that gives us an annual cost of 20 million. He's been there for 3 years, so his book value is the original 100 million less 3 amounts of 20. So he's got a book value of 40. So if Chelsea sell him for 50 million, they make a profit of 10 million. But if they only sell him for 30 million, they make a loss of 10 million. In the present market, is anybody going to pay more than 40 million for him? It's arguable. If, however, you've got an academy player and you sell that player, it's pure profit because you didn't pay anything to sign the player in the first place. So if we take the case of West Ham and Declan Rice, sold to Arsenal for 105 million, came through the academy, 105 million pounds of profit that they can book.
Even though Arsenal did not give them the 105 million, right? So they book it when the transaction is completed.
That's absolutely. So the cash flow is ignored. It's what's the transfer fee? And you can tweak the numbers a bit to take account of time value of money, but then we go into nerd maths, and I suspect your listeners don't want to go that deep into nerd maths.
I'm sure we have some that do, but let's not for the sake of the rest of them.
Right. Don't want to lose half your audience. So clubs have cottoned on quite recently, and it's only been sort of in the last 2 years when more and more clubs have come close to breaking the limits that academies are cash cows. Academies dig clubs out of some fairly unpleasant financial situations. If we take a look at the finances of the 20 clubs in the Premier League for season 22-23, because we've got the financial records for them, of those 20 clubs, 19 actually lost money. So there's all of this talk about Premier League being fantastically successful. Again, as soon as you go anywhere deep, you find that's not the case. So player sales are a way of either reducing your losses or turning your losses to break even or profits. Therefore, it's beneficial if you have some academy players who you can sell. But if those academy players haven't got to the first team, it's very difficult to justify a big fee for them because we don't know whether this 16, 17, 18-year-old young man is going to be the next big thing, or his development has ceased. What some clubs are doing is this type of thing. Now, we won't name any clubs individually because I believe you've got experience of the law. I've got experience of the law as well, having been on the receiving end of some lawsuits from angry club owners.
We don't want to get you in trouble there.
I don't want to get me in trouble. And I've always won them because I took advice from one of your attorney friends who said, just stick to the facts. And numbers are quite good facts, but that's a separate story. Let's say that we've got two clubs and they're both in a bit of trouble. And they've both got an academy player and they like each other's academy player. Now, it could be that they think the market value for one of them is $10 million and the other one's $8 million. So what we can do is we can swap the two players. We'll make a profit of 8 million and 10 million, and 2 million of cash will exchange hands plus the player's registration. There's nothing to stop you from saying, actually, we think that both of these players have got a huge amount of potential. So one's worth 28 million and the other's worth 30 million. So you're still going to have $2 million of cash exchanging hands, but now you've got profits of 30 and 28. And all of a sudden, you're now within your target as far as your PSR profits are concerned, or loss limit. So that is the allegation that's being made because we are seeing more and more of these stories in the media.
Well, let me ask you something, because you say that's the allegation. We're trying to be very specific in language and careful here, but here's the thing that I'm sort of curious about. Technically speaking, is there anything impermissible in doing that? The value of a player is entirely subjective, and two clubs that can reach a mutual benefit through the exchange of players at a valuation they're both prepared to accept in a free market does not, to me, as grotty as it may seem to me, as unethical as it may seem, does not, strictly speaking, in any way that I can see, breach the regulation. So would it be fair to say, let's set aside ethics for a second and set aside the fact that there are young men involved in this and just say, why wouldn't clubs engage in this activity? If Arsenal wanted Eze at Palace and let's say they wanted Reece Nelson and Eddie Nketiah in return, why wouldn't we say we will buy Eze for $120 million and we will sell you Nketiah for 30 million and Reece Nelson for 30 million, right? We're really paying 60 million for Eze in that case, but we both get a huge bump. And I'm guessing the only reason not to do that is not any restriction legally per se, but the fact that you are kicking a rather large liability down the road on your PSR losses in future periods. So I guess I am doing what I always do, which is asking two questions in one. The first is there anything that actually makes this a breach of any regulation? And then the second thing is the downside of doing this that whatever benefit you're gaining now, you eventually have those losses coming that you will have to account for?
Right. Let's take a look at those two questions in turn. Has there been a breach in relation to such transactions? There's two potential issues here. Under rules that were purely coincidentally introduced by the Premier League within 3 weeks of Newcastle being acquired by the Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund, all transactions, including player transactions, of a value of more than 1 million sterling must be signed off by what's known as a fair market panel.
Oh.
So They say, let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at the market value. But there is no market for Eddie Nketiah because he's a unique asset. And therefore, who is to say what his market value should be? And then people will say, well, hold on, let's consider the likes of transfer market. Sure, people go to that when they're looking at players and they've got player valuations. Where do those values come from? Those values come from the weight of the crowd. It's effectively 18-year-old kids sitting in their bedrooms in the evening saying, this player, if you take a look at Dutch football, there's been quite a lot of research done. Ajax players are always valued more than Feyenoord players. Why? Because there's more Ajax fans than there are Feyenoord fans, and therefore they're inclined to inflate the value of their players because it reflects well on them. We live in reflected glory when it comes to our football teams, and they hate Ajax, so therefore they'll put in lower values for Ajax players. So even the owner of Transfer Market says, I wouldn't rely on the values. And the academic research, and I'm a university professor of football at a university here in the UK, we've done, and we've realised that actually that the values there, they don't tend to reflect market values when those players are sold. So it is impossible, I think, to get a genuine value. What the fair market panel might say, if you value Eddie Nketiah at 120 million, we think that that's probably pushing it. So what clubs will do is to say, well, what's the maximum we think we can get away with? And it's all sorted out on WhatsApp. There'll be no emails because they've seen what's happened at Manchester City. Look, it could all be sorted out. And I'm not saying that this happens, of course, but it's all potentially could be the case that you can inflate the sales prices. The net cash transfer is agreed in advance, and both clubs are happy. So that's the first issue. The second issue, are you kicking up an issue down the road? Yes, you are. But surely isn't that more broadly reflective of a society which is obsessed with short-term gain, long-term pain? I.e., I've just been to a football match, I'm walking home, and I decide to have a double cheeseburger. There's no need for me to have a double cheeseburger. I'm not that in need of a double cheeseburger, but I'm going to have it now. I'm going to load up on the calories.
Well, because the kebab shop's just down the road, and it's way better. So that's why you don't get the double cheeseburger.
So that's the position. They acknowledge that they are storing up problems because eventually you've got to write off the whole of the transfer fee. But if I'm signing a player and I've got a 20 million uplift, if it's for over 5 years, that works out as 4 million a year. That's the difference between one position in the Premier League. You get 3.5 million in each. So that's the difference for Arsenal between finishing third and finishing second.
Yeah. And by the way, if you're Chelsea, you may think, rightfully or wrongfully, that you're going to be in the Champions League in the coming years, and that's going to affect your profitability in the rolling 3-year periods to come. If you're Villa, you are in the Champions League, right? So you might say, in the 3-year period to come, we're going to show substantially more revenue, which means our losses will narrow. So, yeah, I mean, you kick the can down the road, but you may have reason to believe that in future periods, you will be in less dire straits in terms of how the losses are calculated, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So that.
So can I ask you something then? Sorry, specific to like let's take the Omari Kellyman deal just for example. The price that's been mooted is £19 million. It is possible then that the independent panel might say the most we're willing to value that at is 10 million. Now, obviously, that doesn't change what Chelsea paid, quote unquote. So they may only get the 10 million then for the PSR calculation. They'll still have the 19 million liability amortized over the period of the contract, right?
That's correct. So for accounting purposes, you could still put the player in at 19 million for PSR, the 10. The PSR fair value panel is going to be under a lot of pressure, under a lot of scrutiny. And does it have the experience of this? I think that's arguable. If it decides on a valuation which is inconsistent between that of the two clubs, as we have seen recently, more and more clubs are becoming litigious. We've got Manchester City being both sued by the Premier League and suing the Premier League. Yeah. We've got the owners of Newcastle potentially going to sue the Premier League. We've got Jim Ratcliffe of Manchester United saying, I don't like the rules. The whole system could collapse very, very quickly because billionaires don't like being told what to do. And effectively, these rules are preventing clubs spending as much money as the owners want to spend.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Just one last question on like the types of deals that we're talking about. Let's say the independent panel says the Kellyman deal, just for example, it's not 19 million, it's 10 million. Is there possible further repercussions if they then say, and we believe that you attempted to circumvent or defraud these rules? And so, like, is there a potential that if the panel does not agree with your valuation, they can then recommend repercussions under the PSR regulations, or would the only repercussion be that it'd be written down to 10 million?
No, there is a separate issue. If you take a look at the Premier League handbook, I wouldn't recommend it unless you are suffering from severe insomnia or are recovering from a very long injury and you've got nothing else better to do. One of the clauses of the Premier League handbook says that all clubs at all times must act in utmost good faith towards one another. Now, as an attorney, you'll say, well, that's open to interpretation.
Squishy,
So I think, I think lawyers would have a lot of fun with that. And, let's say that the two clubs involved in a deal were, for the sake of argument, Aston Villa and Chelsea. What they could say, well, we're acting in utmost good faith towards Chelsea and Aston Villa. So
maybe not to the league as a whole, but to each other, we're doing just fine. We're really happy.
So potential issues, yes. The threshold of proof, I think, would be quite high, and it would be a fascinating test case. And if it failed, does that mean that the Premier League executive have not acted in good faith? Have they been seen to be targeting an individual club? Would their positions in terms of their employment be therefore under scrutiny? There's an awful lot of ripple effects under these circumstances.
So, and one thing that I just want to distinguish for people who are confused by a lot of the different allegations against different clubs for different things, these theoretical transactions that we're discussing and theoretical repercussions, I want to distinguish that from the allegations against Manchester City. And I don't want to go into the Manchester City thing too much because it's a different case with a whole different set of facts and information that is well-traveled ground. But essentially, they are accused of intentionally defrauding the league, of intentionally breaching regulations and then concealing those breaches. The things that are being done or theoretically being done by these clubs that we proposed with these transfers that we've referenced, no one's trying to conceal anything. No one's making any claim other than we think these players are these values, and we're engaging in these transactions out in the open in a market where we believe these are fair market value. Whereas the City allegations are more that they knowingly breached regulations, that they then tried to conceal those breaches and were not forthcoming about what they've done. And again, that's all allegedly. And I'm not saying that we know any of the facts yet, specifically enough to state anything with certainty. He says, trying to cover all bases. But is that a fair distinction between the two issues?
Yes. I think if you take a look at the City case in particular, we can narrow it down to three issues. First of all, they have disguised money from the owners by pretending that it is sponsorship money, which sponsorship money does count towards PSR, ownership injections don't. Secondly, they have used parallel contracts to reduce costs artificially. So again, one of the allegations is that their coach was paid $2 million a year at Manchester City and was also paid $2 million a year to coach for 4 days in Abu Dhabi. Now, if a university in Abu Dhabi wants to pay me $2 million to go and teach there for 4 days a year, let's have a conversation.
If you need like an intern or an assistant on that teaching trip, please let me know.
I'm always in need of legal advice about signing contracts.
There you go. Well, I was a lawyer 20 years ago. That's fine. I'll provide it.
Fantastic. That's most kind. And the third allegation is that Manchester City have failed to cooperate with the investigation into their affairs, in which case, from what I understand, and we all have sources within football, from what I understand, Manchester City's defence is the basis of these charges is in relation to hacked emails. Now, if somebody hacked my personal email and charged me, would I act in good faith? Would I go along with the investigation? I probably wouldn't. I say, well, hold on. Yeah, there's been a separate crime which has taken place. And it looks as if the people who obtained these alleged emails are now threatening to release another 4 to 5 million documents before the Manchester City committee is called into action, which is supposed to be in the autumn, in the fall of 2024.
Thank you. And again, that's just laying out the allegations, not with any claim about the veracity, but what's been alleged. And so I do think there is a specific difference there. And I think that what we're seeing in the transfer market right now with some of the transactions that are taking place is an effort by clubs that are in a tricky spot vis-a-vis PSR, utilizing the available techniques to try to come up with creative solutions out in the open versus a clandestine effort to conceal or potentially or allegedly conceal revenue and or to inflate revenue and conceal cost. So thanks for that distinction. I want to sort of engage your phenomenal intellect here on what is probably the hardest part of this conversation before we wrap it up, which is where this is all heading and how we fix it. I mean, it is interesting, right? Because in the US, where you have a closed system and you have salary caps and things like that, wage caps, we see a lot of player trading done like this, right? Oh, the Knicks acquire a third-round draft pick plus the dead money contract for this player, which is just a fancy way of saying one club as a player they don't want to pay anymore. And they will basically give you something of value if you're willing to take the player they don't want to pay so they can get far enough under the wage cap that they can go get a player they do want. And you say, well, why would a team want to take that on? Well, maybe that team feels they're a few years away from competing, and so they'll take the draft pick. Similar kind of situation here, right? You take an academy player that might be good in the future. You help us with a financial issue. We get a player that we really want. You get relief from a financial challenge. And so these transactions are not so unusual in U.S. sport, although they don't tend to involve the inflation of artificially or otherwise the value of the assets being traded because it's being done in a very open way and in a way that comports with the regulations as they exist. The Premier League and UEFA, by the way, continue to try to carve out rules and regulations for financial behavior of their clubs that achieves different goals that are somewhat at odds with one another, right? Like continue to see the growth and the improvement of the league, continue to see talent flow into the Premier League, continue to see the big clubs dominate. Let's be honest, right? Financially, there's something good about that for the league, but also create enough competitive balance that the league doesn't turn into what we've seen in other leagues like La Liga or Ligue 1 would be a good example. So there's competing interests. We had the prior rules. Now we have these new rules. They're talking about pegging the revenue threshold to an amount of the TV revenue set at a certain level of the club in the league. They keep trying to come up with stuff. My question to you is any of this sustainable? are the different incentives of clubs like Newcastle and City that might be owning clubs for a specific reason versus clubs like Liverpool, United, and Arsenal that are owned for another reason versus clubs that may still be tied more to community ownership versus just the impossibility to get everyone to agree on an approach. In your mind, is it leading to a closed league? Is it leading to the collapse of the system? Is the sky falling? Is there another regulation that could fix this? How do you see the long game playing out here? And are there any regulations that in your mind might be able to get all these competing interests aligned? I know that's a tough one.
I have been tasked by the UK government to come up with such a solution. Mm-hmm. And the first question that I asked back to the government was, what is your objective? Define fair for me, and I can work backwards.
Yeah.
And as soon as you ask that question, you realise that there is no quick fix. I'm a former accountant. I was a corporate turnaround specialist, and in my view, sustainability is an issue to do with cash flow. Now, none of the rules that we have had historically or presently, or that are being promoted, deal with cash. I think you highlighted a very important issue in the sense that we have different owner objectives. Yeah, everybody in the NFL, all the owners in the NFL have got a common objective. All the owners in the NBA, common objective. And that means that they can make decisions because the decisions which are being made happen to work for everybody involved. If you have a profit maximizing owner, let's take FSG at Liverpool, let's take the Glazer family at Manchester United, let's take Stan Kroenke at Arsenal, Joe Lewis and Daniel Levy at Spurs. Their objectives have always been one of profit maximisation. And that is fine unless you are trying to operate and swim in the same pool as those owners who are looking for soft power as their objective. So here we're looking at Chelsea. Roman Abramovich treated Chelsea as an executive toy. It cost him, I think I worked it out as $1.1 million a week for 19 years to own Chelsea Football Club as his personal fiefdom. And what did he get from that? They won the Champions League twice. They won the Premier League on 4 or 5 occasions. And he didn't mysteriously drown in a swimming pool or fall out of a window, as some other oligarchs have done, because
people be falling out of windows, Kieran. I mean, it just to think that happens.
It's the Windows' fault, if you ask me. It's I never blame Vladimir Putin for anything. I used to teach in Moscow, and very interesting city. I'll say no more than that. So that's the position, and until you've got consistency objective in terms of ownership aims, I don't think you can have a set of rules which have a one-size-fits-all. Manchester City owners, and Manchester City have actually broken even every year for about the past 6 or 7 years. The critics say they've inflated their revenues in order to do that, but the owners say, the reason why we do that is because we win trophies and therefore we make more money. And they're quite happy to operate to their objectives. The other owners have got different opinions. So I genuinely do have a lot of sympathy with the Premier League executive. And I think we need to separate out the parties here, because we talk about the Premier League as if it has a mind of its own and is capable of making decisions. The Premier League is owned by 21 shareholders, of which 20 are the individual clubs, and one is the English Football Association, who are effectively a sleeping partner and don't get involved. So the Premier League executive has to effectively deliver the objectives of the owners. And given that those objectives are inconsistent with one another, are competing one another, it makes the Premier League executive's job and role and suggestions almost impossible. The executive suggested, for example, 3 or 4 weeks ago, that they abolish the rule which allows clubs to sell real estate at a profit and include that in PSR. But you have to have 14 votes in favour, and there are only 11. People are forming alliances. Trying to work out the rationale behind those alliances is strange. Could that have an impact upon a transfer over the next window? Who knows? We're not making any accusations, but very strange to work out who is friendly with who at any one point in time. And it's actually now nearly impossible to get continuity in terms of rules going through, apart from the fact that they all seem to dislike Manchester City.
It's a tough one. I guess we'll get out on this then. You know, you look at the NFL, right? And every single NFL team makes more money in profit than any single Premier League team. Ultimately, if you want to compete in the Premier League, you have to make a loss. Assuming you're willing to publish your books accurately and account for things accurately. And that leads me to just ask you, do you think you can ever have a league that fundamentally is sustainable and works as a competitive entity without breaches, without shenanigans, where clubs operate essentially according to the rules and where the competition is essentially fair? And I use that word reservedly. Absent profitability for the member clubs. Is it essential that the Premier League at some point find a way where being a Premier League member club can be a profitable undertaking for the club in order that the league have some control over spiraling costs and wages and ticket prices and regulatory malfeasance? And because the end of this is players keep getting more expensive, wages get more expensive, ticket prices go up, some clubs go bust, other clubs, find ways around rules and then get points deductions, and then owners leave and then the club goes into administration. Is it essential that the league find a way to create profitability for its member clubs as the fundamental long-term goal in order for this to be sustainable?
I don't think that is the case. And the reason why I say that is that the Premier League is a global product. And at any one point in time, there can only be 20 owners of Premier League clubs. There are more than 20 crazy billionaires in the world. And whilst this sounds glib, the find a bigger fool theory works spectacularly well as far as the Premier League is concerned. So therefore, even though we have seen some clubs go into significant distress, both long-term and short-term, if you look at what happened to Chelsea, the people that bought it for 2.5 billion sterling vastly overpaid in terms of any other traditional valuation metric. If you looked at discounted cash flow, if you looked at comparable valuations and so on, we've seen the Everton story drag out over a period of 9 months, where the prospective owners had so many red flags. As if I was a red flag salesman, I'd be a millionaire myself.
Especially at the Emirates.
Yes, absolutely. Such that you'd wonder why anybody would want to get involved. The minute that they were formally excluded from being able to buy the club, 4 or 5 new prospective owners appeared. The huge interest in the Premier League, which is coming from the States, is driven partly due to the fact that the US economy is doing spectacularly well. And it's doing spectacularly well, most of all, for the top 10%. And that's not a political comment, that's an economic observation. Yeah. The cost of buying into a US franchise sporting item is very, very expensive. So you've seen the prices going, and we are talking billions of dollars. You can buy a Premier League football club potentially for 1/10 of that. So if I was a billionaire, I could have far more fun buying a football club, because all of my other buddies, we all own a ranch. We've all got an apartment in Manhattan. We've all got an apartment in Monaco. We've all got 3 helicopters and we've all got 2 yachts. If you go to those parties, how are you going to impress your buddies? You say, well, I've just bought Everton Football Club or Wolverhampton Wanderers Football Club, and we're playing Chelsea at the weekend. Do you want to be a guest in the director's box with me? Do you want to be my guest? You've just owned the room. So Premier League clubs have become trophy assets in exactly the same way that a very rare work of art would be, in the very same way that perhaps owning a stud racehorse which has won the Kentucky Derby or something, you get the kudos of that and you're willing to pay. And there's always somebody willing to pay to take that off your hands, because there's only 20 boardrooms at any one point in time.
Yeah. Really, really good point. Really interesting thing to consider. I guess the problem becomes when you're the billionaire who buys the club that gets relegated, right? So there's really, 20 clubs in the Premier League at any given time, but some cluster of them are always worried about going down. Maybe the answer is just buy Wrexham and make a Netflix documentary and see where that takes you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Look, I've taken up a little more of your time than I said I would, so I want to leave it there. The only thing I could say is I hope you'll come back on because there's so much more that we can cover. And sadly, or for the best, there's going to be need to, I'm sure. So I guess the best thing I can say is I feel a lot more knowledgeable now, and that hopefully when we have these conversations in the future, I'll say things that are slightly less absurd. So Kieran, an absolute pleasure. I hope people will buy your book, The Price of Football, as many already have. I hope they'll listen to you on the various shows that you occasionally stop by on and follow you on Twitter at Kieran Maguire. And most importantly, I hope they'll listen to you when you're back on here, which I hope you will do. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the invite. Have a great season.